Perhaps you can relate to this. You find yourself scrolling on social media for tens of minutes, if not hours. You want to spend less time on social media, but you can't help but answer that siren call of those certain apps or the one app that just keeps grabbing your attention. Or perhaps you're a musician, a writer, an artist, a teacher who really wants to share what they are creating online. And with this, you feel like you're just constantly creating more stuff that needs to be posted and shared. And like Sisyphus, pushing that boulder up the mountain, every time you think you finally created something to share, you find yourself back at the bottom of the mountain, pushing up another boulder, a never-ending cycle that leaves you tired, lonely, frustrated. There's been a lot of buzz around some of the recent research and the idea that social media is having a negative impact on our attention spans and on our health overall. And in this video, I want to investigate how social media may be impacting our spiritual development and our spiritual lives. A brief disclaimer for this video. I'm not here to try to give you one definite answer or tell you how your approach to social media should be. This video is more designed to hopefully invite you to pause and to reflect on how social media is impacting your life, your spiritual journey, and the spiritual journey and lives of your community. Let's start with just acknowledging the fact that the social media apps are designed to grab and then keep our attention for as long as possible. More money than any of us can personally fathom is funneled into the project of learning how to keep people on apps for as long as possible. And this is because the financial model that they are following predictates that they need to keep people's attention for as long as possible because they're following an advertising model, which means the more eyes that see the content and then see the ads, the more money these social media platforms can generate. It's important to remember this because sometimes we can feel like there's something wrong with ourselves or we're disappointed because we want to get off the apps, but it's really hard not to constantly find ourselves looking at them. And that's because they're designed to work against us wanting to be off them. They're designed to just keep us there and addicted to them. One of the ways the social media apps keep us really engaged and sort of hooked on them is they have learned that by tapping into our more negative emotions, they can kind of promote us to be more engaged. And by that, they purposely will use their algorithm to share information that perhaps enrages us, gets us frustrated, or perhaps builds some resentment. Things that make us want to comment or sort of get really worked up within ourselves, and then we just keep scrolling and clicking. Another way is to tap into those desires that individuals have. What are the things that are left making them feel like they're not whole? What are they looking to fulfill in their lives? By trying to figure out each user, they're tapping into some of those desires that we may even unconsciously have that leave us feeling fragmented, separated, lonely, and feeding us content that seems to give us an ideal version of something we should be or should be trying to achieve. How does this relate to our spiritual lives? Well, one of the disciplines of our spiritual journeys is to try and create inner stillness and space to have this stillness, to listen to the divine if that's something we believe in, and to really ground ourselves and figure out what's happening with ourselves without so many external voices sort of commanding us and persuading us and influencing us. Not that they're not always there, but we just try to create these moments of stillness. And in a lot of ways, social media can be in opposition of trying to do that because our attention is constantly hooked on these external factors that also are tapping into some unconscious and conscious desires that we may have. Another way that the social media platforms keep us engaged and connected to them is always having new so-called content to feed us. And to have that, they have to make sure that we as creators feel compelled to constantly create new things that have to be posted and shared. We want to feel heard, we want to feel connected, and in some ways social media has been able to provide that for some people, but on the other side, it has maybe even furthered our loneliness epidemic that is happening, and perhaps part of that is because we constantly feel we need to share a curated version of ourselves. And this is because a lot of times you'll find that you are encouraged to brand yourself. You are no longer a whole person of complexities, you're more a branded identity that can be shared online. I can't help but think that part of this may be connected to the rise of hashtags, which further limited the way in which we see ourselves. We hashtagged ourselves down into these boxes. We create social media themes and identities that just stick within that theme, stick within that idea, and this is how we get more, and with more views we may get more subscribers, and in some ways this may help to us feel more validated, which leads us into another problem that social media may play when we're looking at our own spiritual development and the information that we're taking in. And this is the rise of the so-called influencer market just in general. When we look at specifically the spiritual side of social media and some of the stuff that is shared, I think some of the issues that center around the so-called influencer marketplace also can happen within this side of things. Andy Warhol really tapped into how strong a cult of personality and branding can be when he realized that within the art world, it wasn't so much the art itself that lent value, it was the name that was attached to the art. So it was the fame of the artist that made art expensive or worth buying more than the actual artwork itself. And to do this, you had to try to really brand yourself, and Warhol was an expert at this. I think that this notion of branding oneself has just moved into hyperspeed with the development of social media. And you can also find this very strongly in the spiritual influencer marketplace that you can find online as well. And what this means is that the more followers and the more likes that certain social media personalities get, the more they seem to be trustworthy, or the more people may try to emulate what they are serving. But it's important to remember again that these are branded identities that are shared. It's a fragmented sense of self. And also, just because there's a lot of likes, a lot of subscribers, it doesn't mean it's necessarily a voice that we should be listening to. We always want to make sure that we're using some discernment across any information that is shared online. Also tied with this is the problem of that fragmentation that starts to happen to ourselves. When we are really focusing in on our spiritual selves, we are trying to work towards a sense of wholeness, a wholeness within ourselves, a wholeness with our community, and a wholeness with the spiritual sphere, if that's something you believe in. But social media itself is very much designed to fragment us, and this fragmentation may keep us from really trying to tune into that wholeness that we already possess. And one of the things that the algorithms of these social media apps are tapping into is figuring out the desires, the conscious and very much the unconscious desires that we may have that actually keep us from feeling that sense of wholeness. It's the thing we feel like sometimes is missing. If I just lived in that location, if my home just looked like this place, if my altar space was as beautiful as this one, I better keep looking and get more inspiration for how things should look, how they should be. Maybe then I would be more content. I've already mentioned that the apps work on an advertising basis, and there's that sort of consumer relationship already with social media. But this is also heightened in the way that it does tap into those desires that we may have, because sometimes the use of social media can really lead us to being more of a consumer than we want to be of other goods. Again, if I just had this one thing, if I just looked this certain way, things would all fall into place. And that, I think, has led to what some people call that spiritual marketplace of trying to find what's missing and fill in that gap. And a lot of times it involves having to buy things to just make us feel more whole, even though deep, deep down we know that that really doesn't work. One of the things that is sometimes overlooked when talking about social media and its impact is looking at the carbon footprint that it has. It's sort of something that's easy to forget or neglect to really investigate, but the use of social media does leave a carbon footprint. And this study from last year looked at the top social media apps and the carbon footprints that they have. And depending on the app that you use, well, some of them have quite a bit larger of a footprint than others. As you can see, TikTok by far had the largest carbon footprint, and a lot of this is because of the ways the apps are designed to keep your attention on. That constant scrolling and refreshing of the news feed, it does have an impact on our environment. All of this is to say, it's just something else to keep in mind when we're using social media. Phew, that was a lot to share, and a lot of sort of negative information. I had to make a little bit of tea to take a break, and now let's move on to some things we can do to build a healthier relationship with social media. First step, be intentional with your time and where you spend it. Try to be aware of how much time you're spending on social media. I know I just talked a lot about how it's designed to kind of trap you and keep your eyes on it as long as possible, but you may even want to do simple things like set timers or have blocks of time that you devote to using the social media, either posting on it or just checking the feed, checking in. Second of all, be intentional with where you're spending your time. We don't need to be on all the social media apps. Some things to keep in mind are how information is shared on different social media apps, which ones you feel most comfortable on, and really tune into that famous idea by Marshall McLuhan that the medium is the message. That means that any app you're using is not agnostic. They have a certain philosophy behind them, and that philosophy is tied to how they believe information can and should be shared. So you may want to consider, what's the philosophy behind this app, and is it one that resonates with me? For example, I primarily use YouTube, and this is for a few reasons. One, I appreciate that YouTube sort of takes away the gatekeepers of who can make and share video, and with that they promote and share videos of varying lengths. They don't just focus on super short form content, which can lead to misinformation and I think shortened attention spans in a lot of ways. It also has longer form content as well, but it still has issues with how things are shared because it does have a very strong algorithm. But second of all, I truly believe that creators should be compensated for their work and their creativity. And I find that YouTube is still the most clear on how you reach certain benchmarks to then become monetized, and a little bit more clear on what monetization means on their platform. It's not entirely clear. Again, I think all apps could do a lot more work on making monetization easier for creators and a little more clear. And lastly, another reason why I tend to use YouTube is that I like that it has more of an evergreen quality to the content that's shared on it. When people are searching for something, there's a chance a video you made months or even years ago could still show up, as opposed to the other social media apps where it's a bit more of an ephemeral quality to the content that is shared. Again, this is just my thoughts on YouTube and while I use it, but I'm more trying to encourage you to think about what's the philosophy behind the different social media apps and how those philosophies resonate with you so that you can make a bit more of an informed and comfortable decision with where you decide to spend your time. Sign up for more e-newsletters. I actually think email may really be what can help us to break some of the unhealthy, addictive habits we have with social media. And that's because part of the using of social media is that we think we might miss out on something. But if you sign up for a variety of e-newsletters from different creators and curators that you like, you'll find you're getting the best information and the best articles and the best posts that you can check out. I think that there's more room on the internet to have really good curators. So instead of all of us constantly scrolling and taking in a lot of unnecessary information or things we're not even really interested in, the curators can help direct us to things we may like. But some things to keep in mind: be sure that you kind of subscribe to a variety of newsletters, and that if you're looking at people who are more curators of information, that they're curators who don't just look at the most popular creators, the most popular news sites, but they look all around to share all kinds of things and find some of those hidden treasures. I personally am experimenting with this idea right now and really focusing in on starting my day with the e-newsletters I receive, sort of like a newspaper for the day. And the last idea is sort of tied to the e-newsletters, because you may want to encourage yourself to really take in more long-form content. Since one of the things that's raised a bit of alarm over social media is the idea that it may have a negative impact on our attention spans, we really want to make sure that we're not losing that ability to maintain focus, to maintain attention. So you may want to make sure that you're reading some more longer articles, you're watching more long-form video content, and hopefully taking in more books too as well, because long-form content really invites us to sit longer with the information and to think it over, to mull it over, and to contemplate it. So these were just some ideas for how you may want to rebuild your relationship with social media. It's important to remember that not everything about social media is bad. A lot of good things have come from it too. And it's also important to remember that two things can be true at the same time. There's a positive side to it, and there can be negative impacts from it. That's why we just want to make sure that we really are intentional with how we use it, and that we're aware of how it may be manipulating us. Thanks so much for spending time with Gently Being.